We all know that the Plucky Squire is a blend of 2D and 3D gameplay, but the real question is, does this ambitious concept actually work in practice? So today I'm going to break down what makes or breaks this unique adventure. Now before we jump into the gameplay, let's meet the characters that make the Plucky Squire so charming. At the center of it all is Jot, our brave and adventurous protagonist. Is a squire tasked with protecting his friends and restoring order to his world as he leaps out of his storybook's pages. Alongside Jot is Thrash, his strong but surprisingly vulnerable ally who must face his fears to help save the day. We also have Violet, a young witch with an artistic flair whose magic becomes crucial as the journey unfolds.
Witch with a love of art.
And there's Moonbeard, the wise and mysterious sage of the group. He's a mentor figure with plenty of quirky wisdom, always ready to provide guidance when things get kinda tough. And finally, we have Humgrump, the villain of the story, but he's not your typical villain. He is frustrated with being boxed into the role of the villain and is determined to change his destiny, and this makes him one of the most compelling characters in the whole game. This multifaceted cast helps brings the Plucky Squire to life, making it not just an adventure, but a story filled with depth, humor, and some heart. Alright, now that we know who we're talking about here, let's kick things off by talking about the gameplay. So the thing that sets the Plucky Squire apart from almost anything else is how effortlessly it moves between 2D and 3D gameplay. So in one moment, you're guiding Jot across the illustrated pages of a book, platforming, solving puzzles, and battling enemies, and then the next, you're launching out of the book into a fully realized 3D space. What makes these transitions special is how natural they feel. It's not just like flipping a switch, it's all part of the story. You see an obstacle on the page that's impossible to cross and you think, maybe I can go around it, and suddenly Jot jumps out of the book and you're exploring a 3D desk covered in tools and toys that become part of the environment. It's this clever interplay between dimensions that keeps the game constantly feeling fresh. But beyond the clever 2D to 3D gimmick, the core gameplay is just plain fun. The 2D sections are classic platformer goodness, but they're packed with creativity. The developers clearly took inspiration from some of the best side-scrollers out there with tight controls and inventive level design. And then when you jump into 3D, it's like stepping into an entirely new type of game. You're solving puzzles that require you to use objects scattered around the room. Think about things like climbing on paint cans or using rulers as bridges. It's not overly complicated, but it's just that simplicity that makes it all so accessible. You don't need to be an expert gamer to figure it out, but there's enough going on that you're never getting bored. Alright, let's talk about combat. Combat in the Plucky Squire isn't gonna blow anyone's mind in terms of complexity, but it's perfectly suited for the game. Jot has a trusty sword, and he can also use other tools and abilities picked up along the way. It's all very intuitive, nothing too complicated like I said, but it's enough to make you feel powerful in those key moments. And then there are the mini games. These little diversions pop up throughout the story and each one feels like a fun surprise. These mini games break up the action and give you a little breathing room between more intense sections, which makes the pacing feel just right. Alright, next I want to talk about the characters. So, at first glance, Jot might seem like a fairly straightforward protagonist. He's brave, determined, and ready to save the day. Your typical hero archetype. But what I love about this game is how it takes that familiar structure and surrounds it with characters that add real heart and depth to the story. Violet is one of my favorites. She's an artsy witch who starts off a little uncertain of her abilities, but as the story progresses, we get to see her really come into her own. Her growth feels natural, and by the end, she's not just supporting Jot, she's playing a major role in how the story unfolds. Her character arc is both inspiring and satisfying, especially if you enjoy seeing underdogs step up. Then there's Thrash. Now, Thrash has a fear of snakes, and without giving away too many spoilers, let's just say that this fear plays a pretty big role in his personal growth. I mean, anyone who's ever had a phobia will understand how powerful it is to face it head on. Thrash doesn't just fight snakes, he fights his own limitations, and that's something a lot of players will relate to. And then of course there is Humgrump, the villain who really isn't just a typical bad guy. Humgrump's whole motivation revolves around rejecting the role that's been given to him. He doesn't want to be a villain, stuck on a repeat in some storybook cycle. He wants freedom, and the way the game explores this idea gives it a depth that's surprising for such a whimsical tale. You almost feel for Humgrump, like you understand his frustration, even if you can't condone his actions. That's the kind of storytelling that sticks with you after the credits roll. Visually, the Plucky Squire is one of the most beautiful indie games I've ever played recently. The hand-drawn 2D art captures that classic storybook feel, you know, the kind of books you remember as a kid, filled with bright colors and enchanting illustrations. Every page is like a painting filled with little details that make you want to stop and take it all in. And the transition to 3D doesn't lose that charm. It brings the storybook to life in a whole new way. The environments in 3D are richly detailed as well. You're exploring what feels like a kid's room brought to life. There are paint jars, stacked books, toys scattered across the floor. It really all adds up to make the world feel grounded and playful. It's a great juxtaposition with the 2D art style, and it really drives home the idea that you're stepping out of a book and into something bigger. And then you've got the soundtrack that ties it all together beautifully. The music shifts depending on what's happening. There's light, playful music during the storybook sections, and then in the 3D exploration parts, it brings out some more dynamic, adventurous themes. It's the kind of soundtrack that doesn't just sit in the background, it really elevates every moment. For those of you wondering about the performance, the Plucky Squire played nearly flawlessly on my PS5 with just a couple of minor frame drops here and there. They were so infrequent that they didn't impact my enjoyment at all. And for those of you on the PC or the Steam Deck, well, it's Steam Deck verified and it's got a platinum rating on ProtonDB, which means it's pretty much plug and play. If you want to try running this game on SteamOS, I've made a couple of videos about this before. I'll put a link to it down in the description. You can try them out using the Heroic Games launcher and non-Steam launcher. And as for the game's length, it's a comfortable 10 to 12 hours. Honestly, it felt just right. Not too long that it starts to feel padded, and not too short that you're left wanting more. However, if you're looking for replayability, that's where it's a bit light. There's no New Game Plus mode, and once you're done, it's mostly just about collecting trophies and achievements. But look, honestly, I think the game benefits from being concise. I'd love to see some DLC, maybe something to explore more of Humgrump's story or give some extra depth to characters like Violet or Thrash. Next, we're going to talk about how the game has been reviewed. So on OpenCritic, the game has received the strong rating, with top critics giving it the 83 average, with 89% of critics recommending the game. On Metacritic, it's received the generally favorable rating with a score of 84. The user score is sitting on a 7.5 with a generally favorable rating. On Steam, the game is sitting on a very positive rating, with 83% of the 965 user reviews being positive review. One Steam user, however, who doesn't recommend the game says, quote, "It just isn't fun. It's very hand-holdy to the point that there's rarely anything to figure out for yourself. The minigames are clunky and are nearly always worth skipping. Thank you devs for that menu option. The combat isn't interesting or challenging. The cutscenes are unskippable and often too frequent. Blending 2D and 3D should be interesting, but ultimately it isn't. I found the character Thrash and his associated chapters really annoying. Dude." End quote. Now, this is something that I kind of understand someone might not enjoy about the game. The game is very hand-holdy, so it's really nice to see people actually voice their concern about this. If that's something you're not happy with, if you want a bit of a challenge, I have to say, this game isn't going to give you that. This is a very narrative-centric game, so just keep that in mind. Alright, continuing with the reviews, Shane Robert Moyer from Game Rant has given the game 4 out of 5 stars and says, quote, "The Plucky Squire is a fun romp through 2D and 3D locations, but its boss fights, puzzles, and combat may be too easy for longtime gamers." End quote. Logan Plant from IGN has rated the game 7 out of 10 and says, quote, "The Plucky Squire is a beautiful storybook adventure filled with brilliant wordplay, packed puzzles, and clever dimension-hopping mechanics, but it drags on a bit too long after it's already used up all of its best ideas," end quote. And finally, Steve Watts from GameSpot has given the game 9 out of 10 and says, quote, "The Plucky Squire is a joyful, beautifully visualized adventure game bursting with inventive ideas that will make you feel like a kid again," end quote. So the question remains, would I recommend The Plucky Squire? Absolutely. It's one of those games that reminds you why you love gaming because of the creativity, the heart, and the fun it brings to the table. Whether you're a fan of classic storybook adventures, clever gameplay, or just want a beautiful game that's a joy to experience, The Plucky Squire delivers an experience that's both nostalgic and entirely new. It captures the magic of stepping into a storybook, but it does so in a way that's constantly inventive and surprising. From the seamless transitions between 2D and 3D to the heartfelt character arcs and stunning art style, it's clear the developers poured their hearts into every detail. It might not have tons of replayability, but it's the kind of game that leaves a lasting impression. Sometimes, a well-crafted single adventure is all you need, especially one that manages to say something meaningful about breaking free from your narrative, whether you're a hero or even a villain. So if you're a gamer who appreciates the charm of indie titles that push the boundary of storytelling and gameplay, then you owe it to yourself to give The Plucky Squire a shot. I personally loved it, and I think you will too. And hey, if you've already played it, let me know in the comments, what did you think of the whole 2D to 3D twist? Did you connect with Humgrump's struggle as much as I did? And finally, if you're looking for a more in-depth review of The Plucky Squire, I've published my written review on my Patreon, absolutely free, no paywall whatsoever. I'll put a link to it down in the comment section. It's going to be pinned at the very top of the section, so if that's what you're looking for, you're going to be able to find it. If you find this review helpful, or if you enjoyed it, or if you just want to support the channel, make sure to hit that like button. It helps with the algorithm gods or whatever. And the next video I'm gonna drop is the new Zelda game that came out, Echoes of Wisdom. I'm playing through it right now. I'm very excited to talk about it. It's actually a lot of fun. If you don't want to miss the content when that comes out, make sure you subscribe to the channel and also hit the notification bell so you know when the video drops. Anyways, as always, I really appreciate you spending time here and watching and listening to me just blab about video games. So thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.